Okay. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to Principles, Strategies, and Tactics for WAC Program Development, what we can learn from 5 institutions using the whole systems approach for building WAC programs. Dr. Cheryl Hofstetter Duffy and I will be discussing results from an NCTE 3-year research development grant involving our 5 institution consortium and a self-reflective survey that was completed by the consortium participants on the whole systems approach. You'll hear me say WSA, that's the whole systems approach. We encourage you to access the presentation either through the QR code or the URL, and we'll have several other QR codes and URLs for documents that we refer to through the presentation. This ongoing cross-institutional longitudinal study of WAC program development is the only one we're aware of in the field at this time. While we don't have enough institutions to offer definitive results for our case study and participatory action research approach, those elements, case study and PAR approach, offer important insights into our field to consider the recommendations for larger programs and the implementation of the WSA as a whole. Let's see. Next, there we go. Whether you are familiar with the book WAC, Sustainable WAC, Michelle Crow, formerly Cox, Dan Melzer, and I recommend that you visit our website in order to, because the website, the book itself, the consortium, and this presentation all draw on the whole systems approach that are provided there, that are discussed in that website. There's also resources about these elements and how to deal with new developing or revitalized WAC programs. In the book, we build our justification for a systematic approach to WAC development on the notion that 50% of WAC programs typically fail, according to studies, over time. We saw this as a serious concern. Through this longitudinal study and corresponding consortium, we've come to realize that 50% is actually kind of good, that that the survival is actually impressive, even though it represents statistically a success rate no higher than chance. The fact that half the programs that do start persist and outlast their pilot phases and many years beyond is a testament to strong leadership, institutional commitment to WAC, and productive impact on participating universities, as well as student outcomes against the entropy of university support for programs that don't exist in siloed locations, departments. So our aim with the book consortium and the study is to inch this success rate higher, no matter at what point program starts. What just happened to my presentation? That was interesting. All right, so this next screen is, we offer this figure from previous presentations to provide you a brief overview of the theoretical framework of the WSA, how it uses and derives principles and strategies and methodologies and tactics for promoting program longevity. You'll note from this figure that the complexity theory is the overarching framework, as each of these theories are variations, applications, or extensions of complexity theory. But complexity theory is not just the study of complicated things. Rather, in a case study, in the case of a university, it studies adaptive complex systems, which are characterized by nonlinear organizational structures, reliance on feedback loops to keep the system in check or magnify change over the course of the system, a large number of agents or actors, right, engaged in behaviors that result from local rule-following activity, like the movement of birds in a large flock, and which which lead to the emergence of coordinated macro behaviors, flocking of birds or grading of student papers, in specific ways in a given institution. Systems thinking helps program directors understand how to integrate new university initiatives into institutional fabric by identifying points of leverage to stimulate change that reverberates throughout the system, rather than only tinkering with parts at the micro levels, working that have less impact on the system itself. Organizational network analysis is an application of social network theory and provides a methodology for mapping lines of communication in complex organizations, offering a visual map of the links and nodes through which information passes across the university, and thereby revealing efficient pathways and strategies for maximizing effective communication complex networks. Resilience thinking helps us understand the nature of balance and change in systems and the need for constant monitoring, intervention, adaptation, and transformation in order to maintain balance and longevity. In both systems and resilience theories, the emphasis is on making change beyond the level of individual instructors or classes to better distribute that change across the system. Finally, sustainable development theory provides WAC directors with principles, strategies, and tactics for program longevity and tools in the form of indicators and feedback loops for assessing and improving WAC programs. So this figure lays out the methodology that we present in Sustainable WAC and utilized in the consortium over the 3 years of the study, while we show here a recursive process of understand, plan, develop, and lead. These are not fixed, like they're not, they're much more flexible in terms of stage. They're often recursive between individual stages, and they're not meant to be lockstep. For more information on principal strategies, methodology, and bibliography for the WSA, you can click on that link at the top up there to see a handout that we offered a few years ago at 4Cs that lists all those elements. But we're really I'm gonna show you this other link here. This is the data on which our study is based. You can't read it terribly well on the screen, but I'm just gonna give you a very quick overview so you get a sense of what it is. And then Cheryl will be talking more about this when she discusses the data. They've been color-coded to represent. So what we did is we identified all the tactics underneath each strategy within each stage of the whole systems approach. We, as a consortium, read the book, identified tactics from the book, looked at their own programs, identified those tactics, and we created a master list. Once we created the master list, we created the survey, and you'll see here that in the first section of the data, the majority of participants identified most of the tactics in the first couple of strategies. And as we move further into the data, you'll see there, so we've got lots of greens and blue in the beginning, and then less so as we move forward. So when Cheryl talks about the data more, you'll get more specific information about that. Okay. So we developed our book, this whole systems approach, based on I don't know, something like 50 years of combined experience of co-authors, plus all the vignettes that we had used in the book. But we hadn't tested out the whole systems approach in new developing programs at that time until we received the NCTE grant. So we partnered with 6 institutions to begin with. One of them dropped out, and this became a 3-year study instead of 2 years because of COVID. This presentation reports on the findings from this study. So there were 5 schools that were participating through the majority of the study. These institutions were chosen among 8 applications. 2 others had committed to participation to fill the 6th slot, but both withdrew at different points in the process for different reasons. I'll say a lot more about these schools in a few moments. So the research questions that we were interested in for this study were as follows. We were interested in trying to figure out to what extent the WSA was practical and effective for promoting the development of WAC programs at different points in program development within diverse institutional types and really different contexts. What barriers did the programs face in attempt to interpret using the WSA? And then to what extent does it help WAC program leaders negotiate the challenges that they face? So we started with the methodology we started with was really a collaborative approach, case study approach. We spent 3 years working together, meeting, and I'll say more about the specifics of those meetings in a few moments. But that approach was very helpful and productive. We realized after we finished the 3 actual years of the study and started writing up the study that we were actually using participatory action research primarily, without a large emphasis on social action, although it is part of the WSA. So you'll see some more information about PAR as I move forward. PAR research is specifically designed to create interventions and change in a highly specific localized context, engaging grassroots stakeholders, students, faculty, program leaders as researchers to reflect on program development problems and action agendas with the specific purpose of intervening in those programs to create further change. Researchers in such studies are not detached observers, but are co-learners who are seeking to foster change and democratic shared decision-making. Oops. PAR outcomes are useful for WAC programs that are trying to continue to develop, right? They're trying to identify problems, address those problems, create change, and continue that process in a cycle. So McIntyre notes that as participants engage in PAR, they simultaneously address integral aspects of research process. For example, asking who benefits from PAR project, what constitutes data, and this is subjects contribute to the conversation of what constitutes data, how decision-making will be implemented, and how and to whom information is generated within the PAR project and then disseminated. During the consortium, we met 17 times as a group, online and face-to-face. There were 3 half-day retreats and many 1.5 to 2 hour meetings. As at these sessions, we discussed individual program strategies and tactics, problem solved as a group. Sorry, I lost my place. Problem solved as a group and planned next phases of our self-study. As the 3 co-PIs began drafting a chapter on methodology of our practices, we realized that we'd been working with the PAR principles, as I noted, without having been previously aware of this methodology. From that point forward, we broadened our participatory practices, inviting participants to contribute to the list of tactics, the formation of the survey that they would take, naming them as co-authors of the book that we're writing, and brainstorming with them thematic concerns that led to the table of contents, which we'll show you later. We also started presenting at conferences with them. Here, Cheryl and I are together. And we also presented in Trondheim, Norway this past February. We will talk more about the implications and limitations of using the PAR approach for WAC program research near the end of this presentation, but we suggest that it's likely the most conducive type of research WAC programs can conduct for studying program development and change, because the focus is on problem solving within specialized context with engaged stakeholders at all levels of the program. It also mimics the inclusive and collaborative nature of WAC program work while providing systematic approach for program study. So we put out a call for participants when we started this study. We identified those 8 programs and chose 6. And as I said, one program dropped because the university decided to go in a different direction after the person had made a proposal. Another program dropped because the leader was imagining one thing and the leadership was imagining another thing, and that didn't work out. right? And so this is the messiness of trying to start a WAC program, much less sustain one. We assigned mentors to each institution. So there were each of the 3 authors of the original book were assigned to 2 institutions that we worked with. During the 3 years of the study, as it was extended, we asked participants to gather a bunch of documents and help us think through what the experience of using the WSA was like. So these institutions are quite variable. You'll notice we've listed them, all the 5 that remained, and to show you the differences. So California State Chico with Chris Fossen has not yet developed a WAC program per se, though they've had a WI initiative even at the beginning of the consortium. But Chris was able to identify a range of things to work on, define projects, create networks of folks, et cetera. So it provided him a great deal of support, even though the actual program itself didn't quite yet get started. Fort Hays, on the other hand, was already primed for a substantial WAC program. They had had a WAC program years earlier, and it had been sort of on hiatus for 10 years. There was a great deal of interest both at the upper administration and at faculty level, and resources. And Cheryl was already the chair of the committee, the advisory committee for general education at the time. So she was well placed to be able to help facilitate the process. Notice also that one program is about 18,000 students. Fort Hays is about 4,000 on campus and another larger chunk online, but they're very different configurations as institutions. Indiana University Bloomington was our biggest school. John Paul Canwit was leading that initiative. His program has always been situated within a Center for Teaching and Learning under the auspices of a writing center. He was the writing center director at that time when we started, and he was doing WAC work with faculty, workshops, and working with assignments, et cetera. During the consortium, they hired a full-time writing center director. He became identified as the WAC director, and still the program is not perceived on campus as a WAC program. It's still understood as part of the writing center, so visibility is complex for him. The next one, Texas A&M, actually I had met with Catherine Bridgman 2 years before the consortium started. I met her at Four Seas. They had wanted to start a program. We talked at length, and I encouraged them to develop a committee, a WAC committee. I ended up consulting with them and doing some work with the WSA. They mapped their institution. They found it very productive. And then they decided to join the consortium. At that time, the person who was hired to be the WAC director didn't engage with our consortium for whatever reasons. And then COVID hit and things got kind of weird. So Catherine has been the contact person for us for the whole systems approach at Texas A&M. They were also going through a transition from 2-year college to a 4-year college and a major restructuring of their core curriculum. They're the smallest institution. Then the last institution, University of Mexico, University of New Mexico with Chris Elder, is a Research One institution and Hispanic serving, as were at least 2 of the others. There was no program for WAC at the time, but Chris was provided a 2-year course release to pilot WAC initiatives. In part, it was an opportunity to keep Chris on campus as an advanced scholar who was considering moving other places, but it was also an opportunity to really explore possibilities of a WAC program. And Chris took advantage of that and did a great deal of study and understanding the university institution. For all kinds of reasons, that program did not end up moving forward as well. And so there were programs that managed to grow and develop. There were programs that managed to sustain, and there were programs that didn't proceed. And so we explore all those implications. almost done with my section. This is the survey that we use to discuss the in the consortium that we developed. What I'll do is I'll show you very quickly what the survey looks like, what it tried to accomplish, and how we use, and then we'll have Cheryl talk about the data. So I'm going to click on the survey itself. You'll notice that the first couple of sections are, asking when you started the program, what were these, what stages was your program? And there's some interesting data that Cheryl will talk about perceptions of that. Then we ask, in which stages of the methodology of the program were you developing during the study? We ask which of these principles did you keep in mind and to what degree over the time? And then we get to the section on tactics. So we have under each stage of the methodology, each strategy, a set of tactics. One or two of these tactics appear in more than one strategy, but most of them are unique. And this is the same for the next the next 15 questions. They're all the same thing, and the underlying tactics are represented. At the end of the survey, we ask some more open-ended questions, such as, during the time of the study, to what extent was your program positioned to make transformational change to the campus culture? These questions allowed us to get a more discursive understanding of the context where the participants were working, and a better idea of how they perceived their own programs. We use that again as a lot of the data that we talk about for the study. So now I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl, and she will talk about data. I'll just leave it.
And I need your little clip-on mic.
You can have it.
Thank you.
All good.
Okay. As Jeff said, I'm just going to share some of the data highlights, and I'm also going to talk about some of the specific moves that we made within the whole systems approach at our institutions. And I'm also going to talk about some of those limitations. So Jeff talked about tactics. So there are 4 stages of development. And then within those stages, there are 15 strategies. And then we identified 167 different tactics, specific moves that we could make at our institutions that would meet those strategies. And 154 of those 167 tactics were selected by at least one respondent. So we did make some pretty broad use of all of those many tactics. Some tactics, in fact, were used by all 5 respondents over that 3-year time frame. And I've listed those here, just going to go through them briefly. We all 5 attended faculty development events and meetings, noticed the extent to which student writing is visible on campus, studied the current culture of faculty development on campus, reflected on the current exigency for WAC, studied current institutional realities to determine what kinds of interventions would likely be best received, identified mandates and initiatives that may relate to writing, met individually with key stakeholders, and developed mission, vision, and goals with stakeholder input. Of those 8 tactics, the first 5 are all clustered under the very first strategy, which is determine the campus mood. This chart shows how all 5 of us used those tactics. There were 11 tactics under that first strategy of determine the campus mood. The darker blue bar shows to what extent we used those tactics at the university-wide level or beyond. The lighter blue shows to what extent we used those tactics at all levels. There were 11 total tactics. You can see that the fewest, the program that used the fewest still used 7 of the 11. A couple of us used 10 of the 11. One person used all 11 tactics. So that was certainly the most widely used set of tactics. In fact, most of the tactics that were chosen by a majority of the participants cluster within stage 1, understand, study the campus compact. There are 3 strategies within that first phase. And the first 2 of those strategies determine the campus mood and understand the system in order to focus on points of interactivity and leverage, that is hubs or places on campus where we could collaborate or find a good fit for the work that WAC is doing alongside the work that other programs are doing. Those 2 strategies saw the greatest tactic use. Also quite a bit in that third strategy, understand the ideologies that inform the campus culture of writing. This chart shows the percentage of the available tactics that were used within each of the 15 strategies. So you can see that those first two strategies within the understand phase really got the most use. You'll also see number 6 there did not get much use. So you'll have to just wait and see what is that strategy that didn't get as much tactic use, and we'll explore why that might be. We also kind of wondered, because only 2 of the 5 institutions self-identified as being at the understand phase, yet so many of the tactics that we used were from the understand stage. So why would that be? And the answer is what Jeff had alluded to earlier, which is simply that it's not as though the understanding stage is a preliminary stage that you complete and then move on from. It really is a recurring stage, as are all 4 of the stages. So a little less like a straight road, a little more like intersections and looping back. Moreover, any program that begins the whole systems approach, regardless of where they might be in their in terms of developmental stage, it's still going to be important to start with that reflective work of stage 1, understand. That strategy having the fewest tactics, the lowest percentage of tactics, was actually strategy number 6, consider the impact of WAC on student and faculty equity. That is, issues of inclusion and access, multilingual students, students with disabilities, faculty workload, and so on. Really, only one of the 9 available tactics was used by a majority of us. And of course, we wondered why that might be. We don't really have a definitive answer, but we have some speculation. The worst possibility, I want to discount it, but I'm not going to. I'm saying it's still a possibility that we pay lip service to the issues of equity, but when it comes to actually applying tactics that would make a difference within that issue, we don't necessarily do that. 4 of the 5 programs, in other words. It might be that tactics were used, but they just weren't tactics that were identified and were on the survey. That's another possibility. It's also possible that equity is a strategy that is more typically applied at a later stage of program development. You need to get certain things in place before you address that strategy. Maybe that shouldn't be the case, but maybe it is. And maybe finally, it's just unrealistic to expect programs to do everything all at once. There are 15 different strategies. You can't do it all at once. And this is just a 3-year study. Who knows what year 4 would bring? This is my transitional slide. Because yes, our research is unfinished and messy and limited. For these reasons, the consortium and survey included just 5 disparate institutions, right? And the diversity of those participating institutions made it difficult to derive statistically significant data or to predict outcomes. And because several programs were early in their development, they didn't really work extensively in those later stages of plan, develop, and lead. And our list of tactics, which we're pretty pleased with, 167 for Pete's sakes. We know that's extensive, but we also know that it's not exhaustive and it's not definitive. There are going to be more tactics identified, we hope, and added to the list. The survey wording of certain tactics was understood differently among the respondents to the survey, and that maybe skewed results. For example, one of the tactics said, create a full-scale institutional network map, Well, we all 5 should have said, yes, we did that, because we did. But that phrasing full scale threw some of us off, and we thought, well, I did one, but I don't know if I'd call it full scale, so we didn't check it. So that might have skewed some results. As Jeff mentioned, this is a longitudinal study, and we're just 3 years into it, so it really is still kind of early days. And COVID hit half a year into the study, so that impacted all of our programs. There was some flux in terms of programs dropping out, another program coming in a little bit later. Participating institutions were at different points of development, and also those of us participating, there were different levels of engagement with the whole systems approach among the 5 of us. And we did not conduct multivariate analysis to control for factors that might, outside factors that might have influenced our responses. And those survey responses were highly program specific and individual specific. For example, one respondent, when asked, why did you choose some tactics / strategies over others? That was one of the questions on the survey. And one person replied, so I think for a lot of us, the choice of tactics or strategies came down to what WAC work needs to be done at my institution. How am I positioned to do that work, and what might I be best at? Another respondent wrote, when we started, I was trying to survive, run the writing center, do my own teaching and research to earn tenure. So while this might not have been the best, I really chose the strategies and tactics that supported what I was already doing and helped me to have visible results that would support my tenure case down the line and support our request for a WAC director. So very specific to individuals. I think it will be useful to look at some concrete examples of ways that our institutions applied the tactics and the strategies of the whole systems approach. So this is not an exhaustive list of examples, but just to give you an idea. For example, at Indiana University Bloomington, John Paul Canwit at stage 1, understand, applied strategy number 1, determine the campus mood. Did that through a couple of tactics. One was doing a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and also by consulting with individual faculty. Strategy number 2, understand the system in order to focus on points of interactivity and leverage. Well, they did a map of the writing system at their institution. At the plan stage, they involved multiple stakeholders in the system, which is strategy number 4, by having an advisory board comprised of multiple stakeholders. This was the school that did the most work at that strategy 6, consider the impact of WAC on student and faculty equity, looking at L2 students with disabilities, women in STEM fields. And when it came to developing the program, the project-based development involved instructor workshops that were targeted at supporting the writing of those specific groups of marginalized students. Strategy 11 says deal with obstacles to program or project development systematically, and a tactic within that says to engage at multiple levels. So he did that, including upper administration, and was able to add graduate positions and increase tutors' salaries by being sure that he's not just working at the department level, but or individual faculty level, but working at all levels. At Texas A&M University at San Antonio, Katie Bridgman, during the understand phase, applied strategy number 2, understand the system in order to focus on points of interactivity and leverage by doing a network map. She didn't just do it herself. She brought multiple stakeholders in to work on a network map looking at the system of their university. And I'm just going to quote her here. She says, this was particularly helpful for the faculty participating in that conversation because it highlighted the extent to which our WAC program could become an organic presence at our university instead of something new that needed to be wedged in, which helped build our credibility with stakeholders beyond the WAC committee. Stage 4 involved multiple stakeholders. They formed a WAC Faculty Senate subcommittee to oversee the writing intentional courses, and it was a cross-disciplinary subcommittee with representation from all colleges. They applied strategy number 7, set a mission, goals, and outcomes by identifying sustainability indicators, which helped indicate the pieces that need to be in place for the program to be successful. And strategy number 8, again, focusing on project-based development. One of the projects was the writing intentional courses, but another one were faculty retreats, 3-hour retreats with food, of course, and focusing on writing pedagogy. At the University of New Mexico, Chris Elder, I think you should wave, there she is, right there, did a deep dive at the understanding level by constructing and distributing a faculty survey to try to determine the ideologies related to WAC and student writers, sent to 1,300 faculty with a nice 26% response rate. And a bonus result of that, not only was Chris able to kind of take the pulse or determine the campus mood, but the people filling out the survey learned from that process of filling out the survey. She notes several faculty across disciplines reached out for a copy of the survey, stating that a number of the questions helped them reflect on and inform their teaching. So if you ask, which of the following things do you do when you introduce a writing assignment? You list all sorts of possibilities. And maybe I never even thought of that possibility. And so it was nice to see that list. So it actually ended up being an instructive piece for the faculty participating in that survey at stage 1 understanding. At the planning stage, collaborated with the Center for Teaching and Learning. At the developing stage, faculty development workshops. And at the leading stage, Chris is now the incoming chair for AWAC. So all 4 stages. She notes how that was maybe a little problematic because strategy number 10 of the 15 strategies says plan for gradual rather than rapid reforms to the system. And she writes, well, I recognized and greatly valued the sustainable WAC recommendation to move slowly and purposefully in developing my understanding of my campus context and thoughtfully planning my approach. I was also under pressure from the administration to show evidence of immediate results. Imagine that. So given the brief time frame I was allotted for program development, I felt the need to implement at the same time all 4 stages in the WSA approach. Not ideal. At California State University, Chico, Chris Fossen also did a deep dive at the understand phase. And he wrote, I embraced strategy 1 under understand, determining the campus mood, which provided models of inquiry for more pertinent knowledge about the campus ecosystem than I had accrued through years of experience. So you think years of experience, you're going to get understanding, but actually taking some intentional steps, the tactics under that strategy might prove even more fruitful. And that intentionality is something he talked about a little later as well, where he says, by being more intentional about programmatic structure, the University Writing Committee will be taking a necessary first step toward a more lasting contribution to Chico State, one that focuses as much on the professional development of writing teachers, which was not something they were doing before, as it does on crafting policy, certifying courses, and occasionally assessing student writing. At my own university, Fort Hays State University, which you've never heard of, but we're halfway between Denver and Kansas City on I-70. You may have stopped at Hays for gas at some point, but we applied strategy number 4, forming a WAC committee. Actually, I'm going to back up a little bit and just clarify that there was an attempt in 2005 to start a WAC program at Fort Hays. An English professor thought it would be a good idea and looked at doing writing intensive courses, and it never took off. We never actually had a program. There were guidelines set for writing intensive courses. A few departments submitted proposals, but the courses were never offered. Students never received any notification on their, or notation on their transcript. So the program never took off. It just kind of died. And then it was 10 years later that we were starting a gen ed revision, and I received some funds from a alum who was actually not in English, not an English alum, but it was actually a business alum who said, graduates can't write, so I want to dedicate some money to making that happen. And so as a result of that, we're just kind of starting this fledgling writing advisory group. I made sure that we had representatives from all 5 colleges and the Writing Center and the library. But then it was right about that same time that I became a part of the Sustainable WAC Consortium and found that really there were probably more stakeholders that could be a part of that committee. And so I added representation from our Teaching and Learning Center, which is actually TILT, Teaching Innovation and Learning Technologies. Also from the Gen Ed Committee, multilingual writers, and online instruction. So even greater extent of multiple stakeholder involvement in that committee. We mapped out our university system to identify those key leverage points and hubs with which to work related to strategies number 1, number 2, and 5. And we have since done a lot of collaboration with that Gen Ed committee. We developed outcomes. We developed a rubric. We serve as the faculty advisory panel that reviews course applications that are related to writing. So a lot of collaboration with the Gen Ed committee. We collaborate with TILT for putting on faculty development events. We've collaborated with the Provost's office, mostly getting money from them, and with the Writing Center and with our library. So lots of different hubs on campus that we interact with. And we have focused on project-based program development, a number of projects over the 3 years of our participation. I'll highlight 4 of them here. First, we did mini conferences. We did one that was an introduction to writing across the curriculum, and Michelle Cox-Crow participated with us on that. We also did a mini conference on writing and critical thinking, one for our online faculty and one for our on-campus faculty, and Dan Melzer participated in that. We just had our 2nd annual Writing Tigers Awards ceremony to recognize outstanding student writing from across campus. It's voluntary for departments to participate, but about half of the departments on campus have participated and recognized their outstanding student writers at an event that we organize and provide. Every student gets a writing journal that says Writing Tigers on the front and then has our WAC logo on the back of it. And I mentioned that persuasive writing rubric that we developed that was aligned with a key Gen Ed core outcome. And we also developed a WAC website. I have a link to it, but I don't think I'm going to go to it, but it's a pretty simple URL. It's just fhsu.edu/WAC. You can contrast all of those whole system strategies and tactics with that earlier failed attempt at Fort Hays, which made little effort to involve multiple stakeholders. There was no attempt to understand the larger university system, no sense of how WAC was going to fit in across campus. There was no attempt to make use of leverage points, and really no investment in a variety of WAC projects. There was really just the one WAC project, the WI courses, that is the writing intensive courses. So I feel that through our application of the whole systems approach, we really have been able to establish a more sustainable program. But sustainability isn't always within your control. This is my transition to you.
So I have 2 more slides here. One of the things we realized as a result is that there are a lot of things that are so out of control of the WAC director that we even began to rethink the notion of failure in terms of WAC programs. That is, if you look at this circle, this is actually I should give the full reference to the author of this graph. Forgot I was going to need to do that. There real quick. Okay, here we go. So programs stop and start for many reasons, and often for reasons beyond the control of those who try to facilitate them. As a way to understand what this notion of control is or how it works, we turn to Stephen Covey's Circle of Concern, Circle of Influence from his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which looks at where we focus our time and energy in our spheres of control. So, you look at the circle, you can see the circle that we have a lot of control over is our own sort of attitude, our own energy, our time, our degrees of focus, the people who are working directly with us. The circle of influence include those people who work with us as well, but also includes the curriculum. If it's a WI initiative, it's the people who are working with those courses or the syllabi within that initiative. Then there's that circle of concern that you don't have control over, but you want to impact. That might be budgetary concerns. It might be a range of curricular changes or programs across the university that overlap or connect to your WAC program. And then, of course, there are other areas of no concern. In addition to, so this limited study, we found that the WSA proved to be efficacious as a framework tempered by the realities. Yes. This is the original citation where I found this graph, and she does a lot of work with this in a different way than the original author, but I wanted to offer the original author's citation. Sure. Yep. So the next one, this also shows that the interaction among the co-PIs and case study participants evolved over the course of our study. When we first began, we were a bit more hierarchical with a peer-to-peer mentorship organization as well. We shifted to a much more collaborative organizational structure where the consortium itself also proved to be an important support network for the WAC program leaders. We literally just began talking with the leaders and getting input, talking about tactics, understanding impacts. One of the things we realized early on was that because we hadn't identified the range of tactics in our book, that it might be a useful thing for institutions to have a list of what other universities are doing, what other strategies and tactics they're using in their programs. And as Cheryl said, we will grow this substantially more with the help of others as a way of thinking about not a full list, but a growing set of possibilities. I'll turn it back over to Chris at this time. I mean, Cheryl, I'm sorry.
Surprise, Chris, you're coming up and presenting. Okay, I'm just going to highlight some of the preliminary findings. Some of them we've already talked about a little bit, so I'll move through them fairly quickly. That overall, we found that the whole systems approach was effective. And we're kind of defining effective by the fact that all 5 participants had tangible benefits from using the whole systems approach, even though we used it in different ways, and needed to be selective in terms of which strategies and tactics we used, because the whole systems approach is pretty huge. And 15 different tactics, 15 different strategies, 167 different tactics. No, you don't do it all. We found that it's critically important to take that time in the understand phase, but it can be dangerous to stay there too long because administrators can't really see much of your understand. What they see is that the development and leading stages more so. We saw the value of developing that network on campus. You do have to be careful, though, about which hub your program is associated with. I mentioned all of that collaborative work we did with the Gen Ed hub, which was wonderful until the Gen Ed director announced that the WAC committee would report to him. And no, we didn't really want that because it would really constrain the work that we would do. We would then be working only with undergraduates, and we would be working only with writing within the Gen Ed program. That's not what we wanted. So Michelle, who's my mentor in the consortium, actually I put together a proposal and then she accompanied me in a Zoom meeting with our dean, not our dean, excuse me, our provost. And WAC is now a provost standing committee. So we are where we need to be, but it was almost a dangerous alliance to do all that work with the Gen Ed committee to make the director of Gen Ed think, oh, the WAC committee is mine. Nope. There are many factors outside of program leaders' control that can impact your development, as Jeff mentioned. Given the many challenges facing WAC programs, it's a marvel that any survive. I think our consortium really brought to light all the different things that can go wrong. And so the fact that 50% survive is maybe a marvel, right, in its own right. The goals of sustaining a program and of making transformational change, transforming a campus culture, those are distinct goals and can sometimes be in conflict. We came to see the value of that consortium model. That wasn't really, I don't think initially a part of the study, but what we all found is, wow, this consortium model, all of these 17 different meetings, a chance to have ongoing shop talk and reflect and get feedback and exchange ideas. Yes, more of this, please. It really was useful. I mean, for example, Chris shared about her survey and I said, what? That looks great. And she shared it with me and we developed it and, ended up doing our own survey at Fort Hays. And I don't think that would have, well, I'm pretty sure. Okay, I'm 100% sure that would not have happened at Fort Hays had I not been a part of that consortium and, had Chris's input and help. We also came to see the value of the PAR methodology, that is that participatory action research, where the subjects of the research get to also be researchers themselves. The study did raise questions about the boundaries between the 4 stages of the methodology. To what extent is there overlap and how distinct are those stages? How to define WAC program failure and success, as Jeff mentioned. And also, again, that raised questions about those tensions between program sustainability on the one hand and transforming a campus writing culture on the other. So where do we go from here? What are our next steps? We will continue this longitudinal study. And we're in the process of writing a book, and in the true spirit of the participatory action research, all 8 of us are working together to collaborate on this book project, which is essentially a follow-up to the initial book. Tentative title is Sustainable WAC in Practice, a longitudinal study of WAC programs. Okay, I'm going to be brave and see if I can click on a link and go out. Oh, that was too easy. You can't really see it though. You can see it. Okay. I tried. Anyway, yeah, the link is here in the presentation. So if you get a copy of the presentation, you can go and look at that table of contents and get an idea of what we'll be talking about. And maybe during the discussion phase, we can talk about that some more too. I know that we've all contributed to a chapter of our program profiles, looking at a little more depth at how we applied the whole systems approach. That's one chapter. Methodology, of course, of the study. Really, yeah, Jeff might be able to speak more about that. We'll talk. We're going to leave time for talking, I swear, because we're really close to the last slide. This could be it. And we also encourage others to try the whole systems approach and join the conversation. I attended a session yesterday, Wake Forest University faculty talking about their application of the whole systems approach and the kinds of research that they were doing within that framework. So again, more of that, please. And here's the link again. It's a tiny URL link to this whole presentation. And also our email addresses, Jeff's and mine. And now we'll open up the floor for questions. Thank you. I don't know if we'll need this mic. We'll try and speak from the table, but if you have trouble hearing, please flag us and we'll We'll walk the 4 steps to the lectern.
Does anyone have any questions for us? Yes, please. Oh, yes.
Oh, you could ask it and I could repeat it.
My name is Sarah Markowitz. I'm from a small liberal arts college, and I'm just curious to know.
I'm gonna stop you for a moment. I don't think I'm gonna be able to repeat everything. So I'm gonna run this out to you. Okay, but just her name and her school and.
My name is Farah Markowitz. I'm at Augustana College, which is a small liberal arts college. And I just noticed that all of the participants in your study are sort of bigger, or medium-ish schools. Maybe, I don't know, with your online and like in-person situation, maybe it's closer, yeah, to Fort Hays. But I'm just curious to know any sort of insight into, at least, I know this is not the scope of your study, but any of those tactics or strategies that seem to be more useful for a smaller institution from Sustainable WAC.
And as I walk up here, I'll say, I think, in terms of being a longitudinal study, I think we'd like to look at more kinds of institutions.
That's a great question. And it has, the strategies and tactics are useful in different ways to different types of institutions. And yeah, okay. So you can't hear me? So they're very different uses of strategies. I think that we don't have a clear recommendation of, oh, you should definitely do this or definitely do that, because it's so site specific for the context of your institution. However, if you look at the strategies as a group and you look at the principles, that handout that was listed in the original document that I showed, you'll be able to get a quick overview and sense of what you think will work effectively on your campus. I think probably the most important thing that I found for any campus is to developing the stakeholder group who's going to contribute to the conversation, because not only does that help you separate yourself as the individual driving the program, but it brings in the voices of many people to input, for input, but it also creates circles of impact that then go back to other circles of impact and create those links and nodes across the university. And that network relationship is really important, I would argue, for any WAC program to be successful. Although if we even look at John Paul's program at Bloomington, his was situated in a very small location, a writing center. He was doing faculty training, which was not even recognized as WAC work, but clearly was WAC work. And he was providing faculty opportunities to help develop their syllabi or their assignments. And so he was giving on the ground, he still gives this on the ground faculty contact work. In our whole systems approach, the notion that faculty individual work is very productive, but it's the least impactful for changing the institutional culture, right? So if you look at the approach as a system, then you can find the ones that'll be most useful for you. That's sort of my response.
And I would add to what Jeff said about, if you don't have a WAC committee already, get one. And I just went to the deans and said, who would you recommend for, I actually went to a dean's meeting and presented, and then I went to each individual department and talked a little bit about WAC initially in order to form that committee. And so you end up starting with the champions, the people who already are interested in writing, teaching writing and the writing that their students do. And another one of the tactics that didn't get mentioned, but it's useful, I think, is we also identified a liaison, a WAC liaison in every department, so that sometimes we would communicate just directly with the liaisons or hold a session just targeting the liaisons with the idea that they would then take that back to their departments. Other questions?
I wanted to know, So I'm thinking about my own WAC program, and I'm doing many of these things. One of my areas that I'm clearly aware of weakness is the visibility of student writing. But then I'm running up against this issue of time constraints and labor constraints, right? So I was wondering, in your research, did you get any sense of how the resource constraints of a WAC director or the extent of course release, et cetera, constrain the amount of things and the kinds of tactics a director can develop? You know, I would love to develop a student writing showcase or even a student journal, but then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh, so now on top of everything I'm doing, I'm going to be a journal editor, right, for these student papers and be, so I guess I was just wondering, how does time and resource constraint factor into the development of the programs?
Well, of course, realistically, that is a factor. Having a course or two of release time is ideal. But I will tell you, for our Writing Tigers Awards ceremony, we just had our second one, and I'll admit that, like, for the first one, I did a lot of that work to get it going. But this year, we have, within our WAC committee, we have subcommittees, and we had a subcommittee that was the Writing Tigers subcommittee, and it's actually a biology professor who chaired that committee, and she also emceed the event. And different people did. Someone else on that subcommittee developed a certificate that we sent out to departments and said, you can use this certificate if you want to give your students a certificate in addition to the journal. And so I would say you can make use of people who are excited about promoting writing on your campus through your WAC committee.
And because Cheryl has a smaller institution, it may be necessary to.
Everyone's used to.
Yeah. But in a larger institution, so I have an assistant director for WAC, and for the same kind of event, I have the provost student recognition of publication award ceremony. All students on campus, graduate and undergraduate, who've gotten published, get recognized, who want to be, right? And the assistant director does that work. And it's not that complicated. She sent out information to all the deans and all the chairs and asked them to promote it. And it was up on university systems and notifications to get students involved. And when students submitted their materials, she gathered the names and put them on the website with their titles. And she created the certificates, and she booked the venue. We didn't even have a venue. We did this all online to get as much participation as possible. But the provost gave an address, the dean gave an address, and I gave an address. And then the individual deans from the specific colleges read the names and the titles of the publications. So just having the deans involved or their designees was a really big bonus for the students to be recognized. So there are a lot of ways to distribute time as you need. But I would say, lastly, if there's another graphic image that was used yesterday during the keynote at lunch that shows the different kinds of systems, and one of those is the financial system, and time, and the individual system, as part of that as well. If you look at that figure and think about the different ways to distribute time, or the different ways to look at resources and availability of institutional networks, et cetera, you'll begin to figure out what you can devote your time to, and make strategic decisions on what kinds of projects to develop at your institutions that are sustainable. Great question. Yes.
Thank you. I'm coming from an institution currently in crisis, and that is something I haven't heard this week. Do you have recommendations for institutions who are obviously facing retention issues? I did hear that this week, and it made me feel much better to know that other institutions are facing those kinds of issues. But my institution, our president has said, if we don't get our act together in 5 years, we're going to close our doors. I mean, it's really, do you have, and me building a WAC program, me building a first year writing sequence is sort of a response to that. But do you have advice for institutions in crisis at this time?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's not an unusual one. Unfortunately, it's becoming more and more common. I'll be curious if you have suggestions, but I think the response I would have is that if the institution is failing overall, it becomes much harder to do any kind of program development. I had developed a program this past year for professional English language support for graduate students. And it was based on money that I had for something else that I repurposed. That program is running nicely, but it never got funded by the university because we have funding issues right now, you know? And so what I did is I built a brochure. I built a very nice glossy donor brochure to reach out to alumni, to reach out to donors in the community, and to try to sell this particular piece that I want to fund long-term. So sometimes, especially in moments of crisis, you've got to be resourceful to identify resources. And sometimes you have to wait. It may not be the right moment timing wise to institute a program. And that's something we have to be careful to acknowledge. It also, think about COVID. COVID shut down all universities, and our programs that were participating all had dramatic impacts one way or the other. One of them basically didn't do anything right in terms of the program because it just went on hiatus. I don't know if that helps you altogether, but the other thing you can do is actually try to identify a consultant to visit your campus and help you think through some of the institutional questions or problems.
Well, I would just add that, I hadn't really thought of it before until we had this, Becky P. and Mike Goss professorship devoted to improving student writing. And so I know that I've been department chair before. And so I know that the foundation sometimes reaches out to department chairs and says, what does your department specifically need? Because if we have specifics when we go to donors, they like to be a part of something specific. So I really think your glossy brochure was a marvelous idea. But those of us who aren't in the chair's position, whether the chair passes on that information or not, who knows? But every school has a foundation, where donors give. And if you could, call it the Jeff Galen WAC program, or, you could maybe even name it after, naming rights for your WAC program. I don't know, that might be a stretch.
That's what we're doing with ours.
Okay.
The glossy brochure gives an opportunity for a $4,000 investment or a 250 naming, investment in that program. And we did work with the foundation, and they are connecting it to the university initiatives for raising money, which is real helpful. I don't know how much time do we have left. Okay. Any other questions that someone would like to ask? Yeah.
Thanks for all your great work on this project. It's so helpful for those of us who are trying to think about how to launch these things in the future and when it will be possible, if it will be possible. So I'm curious about, Jeff, through the work that you've been doing with all of your great collaborators on this, have the authors of the original book thought about a second edition? And are there concepts or things that you feel like you'd want to adjust or change, or has doing this work solidified in your mind the framework you set up?
Yeah, we hoped to be able to show you the table of contents to give you a sense of this, but yes, that's the book. That's the follow-up book that the 8 of us are working on. And we are rethinking a range of things from the original book. Clearly, there are some programs who are not prepared to take on an all-out organizational, institutional program. And so a program like that might just get started with the resources they have available and the people who are interested and the particular initiative that seems to have the most impact. But you can use the whole systems approach in that context to think what would be the implications of starting here and moving forward, and what would be the implications of just staying here for several years in order to build a group of folks who are interested, et cetera. things that we've learned. I think we're doing a whole chapter rethinking the understanding phase. One of the really big outcomes from the study was that you can spend too much time on the understand phase. And actually, because there's an expectation for moving forward with your program from the upper administration and outcomes and student impact, et cetera, you may have to move quickly early in that process, which Michelle has shown in her own work with the graduate, with her ELSO program at Cornell. She had to just jump in and start building dramatically, quickly, and overwhelmingly for her. And now she's begun to more step back and systematically reach back into parts of her program to make it more institutionally stable. And she's done a phenomenal job. So we've learned those things. And I think we've also learned, well, I wish I could show you the TOC, but we've learned a lot. Oh, it is? Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, so it is bigger. All right. So you can see that we talk about the goals of the study and the proposal, have the methodology, and then we talk about what the most effective parts that we've learned from the study. But as we move forward, we start talking about a range of themes. What are the roles of building networks and hubs? What's the relationship between the goals of the program and sustainable and transformative change? That we were assuming that most institutions would want to transform their culture, but that's not the case, right? And in fact, one of our programs, Paul Kenwitz, is not interested at this moment in trying to make a larger impact on the university. He's happy doing what he's doing because he's a non-tenured track administrator who has limited resources and limited impact. And so he's doing what he can. So I guess we also really we're writing a chapter on what constitutes failure and because we just assumed that, oh, when a program no longer existed, it was failed. What does that mean? And it has a lot more implications. So we're beginning to sort of explore a range of other themes. Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to say, first of all, what a great experience it is working with the consortium and working with Jeff and Michelle and Dan, and then also my colleagues, including Cheryl. I'm very grateful for that experience, and it's really, I would encourage you to form a consortium model of your own, even just, people here at the conference. It's really been a really big support. And I want to thank you too for doing such an excellent job representing the other institutions and my own institution that aren't here. I thought you did a really nice job of that, and I wanted to acknowledge it.
Thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate that. And I would say lastly, I think that AWAC could be a vehicle for creating these pods of programs. And, even though we have had three field directors and leaders in the field, if you will, who were helping guide this particular one, it's not necessary to do that. It really is extremely useful just to have a grassroots program connections with others who you can go back to over and over again without having to publicly on a WAC listserv announce your concerns or questions or political issues from your university.
Maybe you form a sustainable WAC book group, online book group, and it's like, okay, we're all going to read this and try out different strategies and report back to each other, because that's essentially what we did.
Well, kind of, but we were also having programs to work on together.
Well,
Thank you so much all for your time. I hope this was useful, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.
you have our email.
Thanks.
This so inspired. Someone's presentation.
That's nice.
I know, I've seen many.
I'm sure you have.
Oh, you're plugged in. You got it. You just pulled it with you. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop the Zoom.